Tonight, what does the path to the nomination look like for both parties? How can SU be a more inclusive campus? And a breakdown of the Iranian elections. This is Talking Points. Welcome to the March 3rd edition of Talking Points. I'm your host, Alex Amico. Here's a quick recap of this week in political news. During their first round of missions, United States Special Operations Forces captured a key ISIS militant. The operative is being interrogated by U.S. officials and will soon be turned over to the Iraqis. More ISIS members are expected to be detained in the coming months in attempts to improve intelligence for upcoming missions. In one of the biggest abortion cases facing the Supreme Court in decades, the 8 justices seem to be split. The Texas law in question requires state abortion clinics to meet standards for ambulatory surgical centers and have doctors with admitting privileges at nearby hospitals. While the 4 liberal justices argue that there is no medical purpose for the law and it would close many abortion clinics, the key vote lies with Justice Anthony Kennedy. A 4-4 split would uphold the Texas law, although Kennedy has suggested that the case may be sent back down to the lower courts for more evidence. After crushing losses on Super Tuesday, Ben Carson said that he sees no political path forward. While Carson has not officially dropped out of the race, rumors that he will are running rampant. Carson will not be at tonight's Fox News Republican debate and is expected to give more detail on the state of his candidacy tomorrow. And finally, 2 days ago, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton dominated Super Tuesday, both taking 7 states apiece. Clinton dominated the Deep South as Bernie Sanders won the caucus states of Minnesota and Colorado, also tacking on wins in his home state of Vermont and Oklahoma. Clinton eked out a 1-point win in the battleground state of Massachusetts, finishing the day with more than 500 pledged delegates compared to 340 for Sanders. On the Republican side, despite winning 7 out of 11 contests, Donald Trump only added about 30 more delegates than Ted Cruz. Cruz got a big boost winning his home state of Texas, with additional wins in Oklahoma and Alaska. Losing a key contest to Trump in Virginia, the only win for Marco Rubio came in Minnesota. Looking forward, Trump and Clinton have large delegate leads and are clear frontrunners for their party's nomination. Here for more discussion on Super Tuesday and the nomination process moving forward are Talking Points chief political analysts Topher Lane and Josh Carney. Guys, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So Topher, I want to start with you. Ben Carson seems like he's talking his way out of the race. Is there any rationale for anyone else who didn't win a seat on Super Tuesday, John Kasich, for example, to stay in the race?
Well, John Kasich, upcoming Ohio coming up in the middle of March, and that's going to be a big thing for John Kasich. If he can win that state, then he can definitely stay in the race. At least logistically speaking, it makes sense for him to probably stay in the race. Carson, on the other hand, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and he being on the fence right now about staying in the race, it makes a lot of sense that he possibly drop out with the support that he's getting, less than a couple percent in every state that he was polling in. So I don't think that there's much rationale for people like Kasich or Carson to stay in. Rubio also, who only won Minnesota, it's tough to say that he should necessarily stay in the race.
And Josh, now on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders has been he's had some pretty harsh rhetoric toward Hillary Clinton, and he did lose quite a few states on Super Tuesday. What's his plan going forward?
He needs to define his plan going forward, because right now he's winning states that are heavily Democratic and strictly blue, but he got swept by Clinton in distinctly red states. So when you look at where Clinton is winning, where Bernie is winning, it seems as if Clinton is more prized for a national election. She can win a general because she can win states based on her moderate appeal and the brand that she's built. A lot of people down south either don't know enough about Bernie, don't know enough about his policies, or aren't willing to accept them because they're so comfortable with Clinton. He has to find a way to break that mold in the states that are coming up, because right now Clinton blew him out of the water.
And Topher, looking forward for the Democrats, what does the path to the nomination look like for both of them?
Well, it's vastly different for Sanders in this capacity. He needs to look forward to the Democratic states, the largely Democratic states, California, New York, the ones that he could really upset Clinton and get a lot of delegates in. Clinton, on the other hand, really has to do the rest of what she has been doing. She has to stick to her roots and really hold on, having Bill Clinton advocate for her. Different rallies that he's gone to have really raised support, especially among minority voters, black voters, Latino voters, which she won those votes in most of the southern states that she was part of in the Super Tuesday votes.
Josh, for the Republicans, Super Tuesday gave us quite a few more questions than we have answers. What does the path of the nomination look like for the remaining candidates who aren't about to drop out?
We won't really know what the path of the nomination looks like until it narrows to a field of two, but until then, it's pretty much a toss-up in both Ohio and Florida, seeing if those former governor and current governor and current senator can win in their home states. Because if they can't, there's really no reason for them to stay. And when that happens, if it does, where do those votes go? Those are the big concerns, because we'll largely see, based on the polling information we have now and looking forward, that it will likely narrow to Trump and Cruz. And when that happens, where do those who are trying to elect a more moderate base go? Do they go to Trump or do they go to Cruz? What states do they fall in, and what issues are most important to them? And then the GOP will be able to refocus with two non-establishment candidates.
And Topher, if you could answer what Josh just asked, where do those votes go? Where do the moderate votes go if it's a Cruz or Trump, or where do any votes go, whatever the two candidates remaining are?
I think right now, I mean, the two remaining candidates, if they're Trump and Cruz, I would assume they would go to Cruz, especially because I think Rubio is going to be the last candidate of the three that's going to be holding on. I think that with the way that he's really attacking Trump, that all of his supporters are going to flock to Cruz rather than go to Trump. I don't see any reason that they would go to Donald Trump, considering the relationship that right now Rubio and Trump have.
The polls that I've been seeing also say that a lot of these more moderate votes are going to go to Cruz, largely because he's an idealist. He has his terms and his policies set in stone, and people are much more comfortable at least knowing what they're getting versus not knowing much of anything.
And Josh, by any standards, Bernie Sanders' campaign has defied all expectations. But after a not a great performance on Super Tuesday from him, what's his end goal for this primary?
He needs to focus on states where he has a true shot at winning, where it's really the West Coast and it comes down to California. If he can't win big, heavy delegate states, then he's largely going to see his campaign take a downward, not spiral, but turn. So if he wants to play the same progressive role and be a progressive leader in either the Democratic Party or from an independent lens, he has to stop going negative and has to focus on the issues relating to his campaign. Right now, based on the polling and based on how Clinton swept through the South and has a moderate appeal, it's unclear what is ultimately going to happen to Bernie. So if he wants a position in the future, regardless of what happens, he's going to have to stop going negative and start reapproaching his campaign, focusing on where he can win, playing to his advantages, and thus he'll be able to at least sustain for now.
Josh, Topher, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us, Alex.
We'll be right back.
So they say it's a man's world? I don't see anybody's name on it. While they were doing their thing, we slowly changed all that. Today, women can do anything men can do. And there's one thing we're even better at.
Watch CitrusTV Noticias at 3 p.m. every Sunday on the Orange Television Network.
Issues of free speech in a diverse society were the main focus of this year's Posse Plus retreat. Posse is a scholarship that seeks to promote diversity and leadership. Our own Posse scholar, Talking Points correspondent Elijah Shama, was at the retreat. Elijah interviewed his faculty guest professor, Charisse Lepre, in the studio to see where she stands on these issues.
One of the main arguments for the limitation of free speech. What role do you think hate speech plays in the dialogue that's occurring today, and should it be allowed to remain?
So for the most part, hate speech focuses on ascribed groups, groups to which you have no control over whether or not you belong. I think hate speech is also further complicated by the idea of intention versus impact. That the words we say, we may even intend for them to hurt a specific group. We could talk about, dog whistle politics and coded language. So you might intend to hurt a group, but if it's not overtly hurtful, if it's not overtly hateful, then it doesn't count as hate speech. So I think the phrase, I think the phrase itself, hate speech, is inherently problematic. There is a legal definition, but there's also a colloquial definition. And it's very quick, I think people are very quick to focus on the colloquial definition. And sometimes, honestly, the colloquial definition can be a better definition than the legal definition, because I see it over and over. The question is whether or not this person committed a hate crime. And the only indication we have of a hate crime is whether or not they used hate speech. That seems inherently problematic to me when hate speech is categorized as certain speech.
All right, I'd like to circle back to that idea of intention, because many people often offend people unintentionally. What's the role of intent when using language, and how should someone wanting to learn more about these often controversial terms approach a conversation so as not to offend a party?
So, two things. One, I question whether or not we should be fearful of offending people. And I say this explicitly because we learn through those conversations. So if we're afraid of offending people, which is kind of the politically correct argument, the discourse right now, big air quotes around it because I don't like that definition of politically correct, but let's move on. Because people are afraid to offend people. I think that the more valuable conversation is, why is it offensive? What can I learn about your history or your experience to let me know that that was offensive? Absolutely, I have said offensive speech before, perhaps without intention. And somebody then checked me and said, well, that's hurtful because this, this, and this. And we all learn a little bit more. I learn a little bit more about the person who is offended. The person who is offended learns a little bit more about me. And I come up with better words to describe what I was thinking, especially if that was not my intention. So I don't think we should be afraid of offending people. By that same token, I don't think that we should, scream off with their heads when somebody says something offensive, but rather, why is that offensive? What does that tap into your history that I am unaware of, so that I can learn more about it, so that I can choose my words carefully, so that I can be a cognizant adult that can express themselves appropriately, given a massive history that I may or may not be aware of.
All right. Our last question. During the Posse Plus retreat, scholars were encouraged to bring the conversations back to campus. How do you feel Syracuse deals with the issue of diverse speech on campus, and what do you feel can be done to foster a more inclusive campus environment, especially for minority students?
Two things. One, I question exactly how much Syracuse University as an institution can do. Because, at Newhouse we have a requirement, a diversity requirement, where students are required to take my class, which is fine. We could institute a diversity requirement across all the departments and all the schools. Having said that, most of the conversations that end up happening are opt-in conversations, otherwise known as preaching to the choir. So the Institute can have a talk-back session, but the people who go are the people who want to talk back, the people who are affected by this. The people who are not affected don't have to go. So the only way to get them to do something is to have a requirement. So for me, I think that the institution can foster conversations, but it can't necessarily demand them.
Thank you so much for coming on. Back to you, Alex.
With Donald Trump moving closer to winning the GOP nomination, establishment Republicans are beginning an unprecedented attack on Trump. Here to talk about why this is so unusual and the disastrous effects it could have for the party is Talking Points correspondent Dan Prager.
There's no longer any question. Donald Trump is the frontrunner for the GOP nomination for president. After months of assuming the novelty would fade, the GOP is finally realizing that Trump is likely going to be the nominee. Establishment leaders are worried that this could do irreversible damage to the party's image. They've begun planning an all-out campaign against Trump, one that's very risky but could save the party in the future. The establishment has tried to take him out before, but have now begun what some are calling the nuclear option: take out Trump at all costs. The plan involves an all-out attack from other candidates and large donors to get rid of enough Trump support that they can reach a brokered convention where they would likely make Marco Rubio the nominee. However, this is a lose-lose situation for them. If they can take out Trump, it will alienate a huge portion of their base and hurt whoever the nominee is. It could also cause Trump to run as a third-party candidate, making them lose the election. If it is too late to stop him, then they have been attacking their candidate and giving fuel to the Democratic nominee. They'll lose 2016, and it will also splinter the party and possibly cause irreversible damage. The anti-Trump campaign is an attack on many fronts. Instead of attacking his controversial comments, which has not worked, they're attacking his greatest strengths. The debate last Thursday was the first time attacks on Trump began, with Ted Cruz and Rubio both going after Trump repeatedly. Things like the pending Trump University case, his hiring of illegal workers at some of his hotels, and his tax returns, which he has been pressured to release, were brought up. His image of a strong businessman who tells the truth was under attack, and it's no coincidence that Marco Rubio started calling Trump a con artist in recent campaign stops. The attacks have already begun, and it looks like there will be no end to them until the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Today, 2012 Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney had this to say about Trump.
Donald Trump lacks the temperament to be president. If we Republicans choose Donald Trump as our nominee, the prospects for a safe and prosperous future are greatly diminished.
Expect attacks like these to keep up as the GOP tries to get under Trump's skin.
Now, Dan, you just showed former nominee Mitt Romney with a pretty brutal attack today. Who all is leading this assault on Trump? What are some of the key players?
Well, there's really three people that are leading the charge. As we said, Mitt Romney is one of those people. He called on Trump to release his tax returns, saying that there might be a bombshell in them, and really taking Trump's credibility away as his businessman front. Marco Rubio as well has really been attacking him, really personal insults, making fun of his hand size, the color of his skin, his orange spray tan appearance, and just really a lot of personal things attacking him, calling him a con artist a lot as well. But really one of the surprise people is John Oliver, the comedian from Last Week Tonight. He had a whole segment on Donald Trump, really culminating in the Make Donald Drumpf Again technique, based on Trump's ancestor's last name, Drumpf, saying that if they can take away his brand and his last name, Trump really isn't that good of a candidate.
Okay. Well, so as far as strategy goes, what are they going to do next? Today was another step with this pretty much unprecedented speech. What's their plan next in this campaign against Trump?
So it's really they're trying to attack three things about Trump, three of his strengths. The fact that he's a strong businessman, that he tells the truth, and that he's just really an all-around good guy. So you're going to see a lot about his tax returns, about hiring illegal immigrants, to try and take away the fact that he's a strong businessman, to try and make people believe that he's really not. And for telling the truth, some people have suggested making truth squads, which would basically follow Trump around and point out whenever he was being a hypocrite or just in general a liar.
Now, we've had 15 primaries already. This is usually the nominees pretty much sewn up by now, in recent years at least. Is it too late for this campaign?
Well, in a word, no, but it's going to be tough. Trump has actually only gotten 46% of the delegates allotted so far, so really all the other candidates combined have gotten more delegates than he has. However, with Cruz, Rubio, and Kasich kind of splitting up the voters right now, there's really not much of a path unless one or both of them drop out that they can coalesce around somebody and really defeat Trump.
Dan Prager, thank you for your insight. After the break, a Supreme Court case vote tied at 4-4. Don't go anywhere.
Housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
The first Supreme Court case following Justice Scalia's death is bringing to light just how difficult decision-making could be with 8 divided justices. Here to talk about it is Talking Points correspondent Tom Austin. Tom, thank you for joining us. So what is this case? What is this case that's causing such a division on the court?
Yeah, so Utah versus Strieff is it's a dispute over the events leading up to the arrest of Edward Strieff. And basically how it started was the Salt Lake City police got a tip about illegal activity going on in a house. And after they received that tip, they started to surround the house and monitor it. And what they saw while they were monitoring it was, people going in and out pretty quickly, which they thought was pretty suspicious activity. And when Edward Streiff came out, they detained him. And while they stopped him, they used an outstanding traffic violation as a means to issue a search warrant. And when they searched him, they found methamphetamine on him, and subsequently arrested him. And what Streiff is arguing is that during that, they violated the Fourth Amendment, the amendment that deals with unreasonable search and seizure.
So it will, I guess, in a word, did it? Is this an example of unreasonable search and seizure?
Yeah, so both sides, both the detective and Streiff, all the Supreme Court justices agree that detaining someone for leaving a house that, was suspected to be involved with illegal activity is not, a sound suspicion, for stopping someone. And so his argument is a good one.
And so if they're agreeing on that, what's the main area of disagreement that's causing this 4-4 split?
Well, they disagree on the exclusionary rule, which is built into the Fourth Amendment. And the exclusionary rule basically says that any evidence gathered during an unreasonable search and seizure must be excluded in court. And that's what Streiff is pushing for. But adversaries are saying that because the search, after they figured out that there was an outstanding traffic violation, because that search was legal, that is a perfectly reasonable reason to search someone. Adversaries are saying that the link between the illegal police activity is distant enough for that evidence to be admissible in court.
Is there any Supreme Court precedents that might help bolster one side or the other's argument in figuring this out?
Yeah, so there is a precedent. There is the attenuation doctrine. And basically what it says is that evidence gathered during police misconduct can be admissible if there are interceding events that make that link between the police misconduct and the evidence being gathered, if they are distant enough. And so, proponents of that will push for that principle.
Tom, thank you for joining us. Citizens in Iran took to the polls Friday in the first election since the U.S. and Iranian nuclear deal led to the removal of crippling sanctions. Talking Points correspondent Sarah Nevin is here to explain the election results and what they mean for the future of Iran. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
So let's start with sort of explaining Iranian electoral politics in a brief amount of time. Who and what were the Iranian citizens voting for?
So first, Iranians elected members to the Islamic Consultative Assembly, which is a 290-seat parliament. They kind of do the basic day-to-day governing in Iran and are elected every 4 years. Then Iranians also elected members to the Assembly of Experts, which is a really powerful 88-seat council. Their main job is to choose the supreme leader who sits above the president. And in theory, they can knock out the supreme leader every 8 years, but they've never done that. This was also the first time that both of these elections took place at the same time.
And what were the results of these elections? What parties came about winning in this?
Yeah, so first off, more than 60% of eligible voters turned out to vote, which is really significant. Moderates and reformists saw the biggest gains and had a lot of success. They favor social freedoms, working with the U.S., and favored the nuclear deal that recently passed under President Rouhani. They won around 83 seats and took all 30 seats in the capital, and then moderates also won 73 seats. So now they have the majority in the parliamentary. As for the Assembly of Experts, the current conservative chair was knocked out, and moderates saw a lot of gains there.
And so short term, what's the importance of these elections for Iran?
So the most important thing was the change in leadership in the Assembly of Experts. They've had 2 supreme leaders since 1979. The first one died in office. The current one, Ayatollah Khamenei, is 76 years old, and he's been ill for really the last decade, and he's most likely going to die in the next 8 years. So this assembly will most likely choose the next supreme leader. And this is really important because he really holds all the power in Iran. He sets the tone for the country's policies and really controls the government. the government can really only be as reformist as he allows. And so the current supreme leader is a hardliner. So if another hardliner is selected, then it'll probably be another 20 years till Iran has a chance at serious reform again.
President Rouhani, there have been indications that President Rouhani is a moderate and even some would say a reformer. So with the moderates and his allies winning so many seats in both of these houses, what does this mean for their future in Iran and the future of the country in general?
Yeah, so Iran really finds itself for the first time with a legislative body that's more moderate and reform than conservative for the first time in like 20 years. And so the election results really show support for everything President Rouhani is doing, and it shows that Iran is ready for this change and they support this change. And now there's also the possibility that a moderate supreme leader could be selected, and that would really change the way Iran interacts with the rest of the world for the next several decades.
It certainly would be a shift. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Stay with us.
Connor is struggling in school. Finding lowest airfare to Istanbul. Why don't you understand me? I do. This is what it feels like for kids with learning and attention issues. Redirecting to understood.org.
Everybody has a dream. Mine was to see the ocean. And with a little help, I made it.
This new mom is struggling to get the skates just right. Now she's holding on for dear life.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of siblings in foster care will take you just as you are.
Riding off a deal-filled 2015, the pharmaceutical industry is back again with more mergers and acquisitions swallowing up the space. Talk Points correspondent Molly Smith joins us now to talk about the latest trends. Molly?
That's right, Alex. Now, with deals happening virtually every day, Big Pharma seems to be growing bigger and bigger. As the companies continue to buy each other out for a greater piece of the pharma pie, M&A activity is reaching an all-time high. Now let's take a look at the latest deal that passed earlier this month. Chinese state-owned chemical company ChemChina agreed to buy the Swiss biotech firm Syngenta. The acquisition is valued at $43 billion and when completed will make ChemChina the largest supplier of pesticides and agrochemicals in the world. The catch, though, ChemChina is seeking $35 billion to finance the deal between a loan facility and other bank loans. We'll be following that one closely to see if the funding comes through. And while this is the sizable deal to kick off 2016, last year made a huge mark on the industry. With investor pressure to drive revenues and a time crunch with rate hikes looming, 2015 was an explosive year for Big Pharma. In just the first half of the year alone, pharmaceutical deals had already topped $221 billion, well above the $162 billion total for 2014. And later that year, Pfizer and Allergan completed an all-stock merger worth $160 billion, making it the largest pharma deal of all time. And the reason for all the deal craze? Well, let's look at two of them. First, from a company perspective, it's much cheaper to buy the maker of the next breakthrough drug than to try to develop it on your own. And as for funding, a low-rate environment makes for cheap debt financing. The Fed lifted rates from their near-zero level last December for the first time in nearly a decade. But the markets in 2016 so far have left their next move in question. We'll have to see how this shaky rate environment affects the big pharma world going forward. Alex, back to you.
Thanks, Molly. That's all the time we have for Talking Points this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to check out Citrus TV News on Twitter and Facebook, as well as all of our content on YouTube. And don't forget about our Talking Points blog. For Talking Points, I'm Alex Amico. Good night, Syracuse.